Welcome back to the Raptors show on the Sportsnet Radio Network. I'm your host, Wim Lou. Nobody at the podium just quite yet, so we might have cut Grange off early. But I'm entering hour three. We're already in hour three with
Yeah.
with Blake Murphy. Blake, how you feeling, man?
I'm trying to answer people's questions and stuff like that on Twitter during our breaks and stuff. I'll write up all the cap ramifications and stuff, but I can sense some frustration that you tweet out a detail or whatever, and people are upset because they don't like.
What's going on?
We
man?
do have to zoom out and take a look at this as a whole, and I agree with the general sentiment that it's going to take some understanding and some questions in this press conference to understand. But yeah, anyway, I need a little bit of time to sit with this and go over my G League top guards list, because this is honestly probably the most exciting thing I'll turn my attention to after I get the cap update and the summer outlook up. Is the Raptors have 2 open roster spots and obvious need at guard, and maybe even for an extra depth developing center.
Do you convert Jonte?
I mean, there's not really a need to, and you can make the argument sometimes that it's better not to. So he can't max out his days. You could convert him because it's a reward for him and stuff like that.
Okay.
But if you do that now, you can only sign
rewarding
him.
employees is a good sign of healthy culture. But anyway, that's a separate
you can
thing.
only sign him for this year and next if you convert him now, because all of your mid-level exceptions used up. If you were to wait until the offseason and he's a restricted free agent, you could sign him to a longer-term deal. So look, I'm always going to be in favor of, especially with these two-way guys, the G League guys who've been grinding, get them their money, get them their payday and stuff. But from a purely roster flexibility standpoint, if you want to be cold and calculated about it, it would probably make more sense to just wait until the offseason, because then you can sign Jonte to a longer deal. But maybe they're not thinking that way. Maybe they think like I think, they want to reward these guys. I've gotten a couple questions as well. So just while we wait for Bobby,
Sure.
Marquise Noel's hurt still. He strained his hamstring pretty bad a couple weeks ago. His status for the All-Star game next weekend, he made the G League All-Star game. That status is still in question. So in terms of the immediate point guard depth for this Raptors team, it's Garrett Temple, it's Javon Freeman-Liberty, who is much more a combo guard than a point guard, and then it's the Bruce Brown, Scotty Barnes, RJ taking on more responsibility types. When we eventually zero in on, like we did when Jakob Poeltl got hurt, hey, who are some G League potential fill-ins? I'm obviously going to focus that more on the point guard position. There are some cool names out there. I still haven't given up the hope on Sharif Cooper, who's been balling out with Cleveland's team. There are a couple other guys. Santa Cruz has a really spicy guard who's really improved a lot as the season's gone on as well. I got to sit down and come up with a list like that. But first, we got to do the cap updates, which is post show here.
Oh, you about to? I know you're about to cook. I know you're about to cook.
I mean, there's not that much. It's they could have all the cap flexibility in the world, but that would mean declining Bruce Brown's option of trading him, renouncing the rights to Kelly Olynyk, et cetera.
After all this, I'd be so upset. Man.
Yeah, it would be. And this is
sorry,
the thing,
man.
like we talked about, and maybe I didn't do the best job of wording it, but I got some questions like this on Twitter, so hopefully people are listening to the show as well. Is there is, when Woj says that there's a lot of flexibility with Bruce Brown, it's true, but that flexibility diminishes as each decision point. The flexibility of we could do 5 different things at 3 different points in time changes when now it's, we could do 3 different things at 2 different points in time. It's the same thing we went through with the Pascal stuff, where it's you could trade him or extend him, et cetera. There is still that flexibility. That is true, but it is less tomorrow than it was today.
This team loves acquiring flexibility. It's the number one thing they love acquiring. Okay, so there are the open roster spots. I think now that the roster is finally set, I suppose for everybody it's a bit of a relief, just because go through the trade rumors, and of course there's always things that are rumored, and whether or not they actually come to fruition, it doesn't really happen, and then you end up in the situation where you feel like it's a little disappointing. I'm certainly relating to that feeling right now. But at least it's over, and now you can look just at the roster as is and sort of how they want to move forward. I mean, I don't get the sense after this deadline that they're just looking to not be competitive the rest of the season. I think they still want to compete, but most importantly, that's secondary to how those young guys continue to grow. I just hope that they continue to find minutes for those young guys, not just for Scotty quickly and RJ, but also for the other young guys as well on the roster.
Grady, Abaji, who you need to see more of now.
Yep. I think I want to see more Wara as well. I feel like Wara gets left out of these. Is it because is he unrestricted afterwards too?
He is unrestricted. You have rights on him, so that's important. But I think the reason that he comes up a little less, on top of which, just as soon as they got healthy, he stopped playing. He's also 25 and we have 4 years of him being like I said this at the time when he was acquired, and like he's had a couple nice games for the Raptors, but like we know who Jordan Nwora is to a pretty good degree. It's like making
So
the
why
case
do we get him then?
because you need to make the salary math work in the Pascal deal. Like I think it was one of those things like you got to take 2 players back in addition to Bruce Brown, and Indiana wasn't giving you their prospects. So you took Jordan Nwora because, like, I mean, he's a competent NBA player. We've obviously seen that. We've seen it, like, Milwaukee and Indiana weren't bad teams. But in terms of, like, hey, which young guys do you need to see more of? Like, it's the same as making the case of, like, of playing Gary Moore. Is like, you can make the case to play Gary Moore because he's balling out lately and he's shooting the 3 really well. He's 25. He's been in the league 5 years. Like, we know who 6 years for Gary, 4 for Nwora. But, like, we know who these guys are. They've been in NBA rotations on competitive teams. And, like, yes, they're not finished products yet. But, like, we know who those guys are more. And they've had more developmental opportunities than, say, a Grady Dick or an Ochai Agbaji. Again, Abaji's a little older for a prospect and came through a major program. So, not to the same extent. But, like, yeah, Grady Dick should be getting more of those reps and things like that.
I guess I would just hope that they're not competing with each other because again, like the only thing
I mean, they are competing with each other.
Okay, the thing I'm going to push back on is who Nwora was for the Pacers, who Nwora was for Milwaukee before that. Those are all context dependent.
Yeah.
I was hoping that it changed the scenery for him, and we saw a couple good games for him, and all of a sudden now we have no minutes for him. We hoped that the trade deadline was going to clear some other contracts around, so maybe there's some more clarity for him. It doesn't seem like that's affected his situation. If anything, there's another guy that's jumped ahead of him in the rotation in Agbaji. Like we I guess we don't get to see it. You know what I mean? Other than a couple flashes, which were good.
So I understand why you're pushing back in that way, but again, like they have 6 wing/forwards who are 25 and under. And like so you have to draw. Like you can't play all of them. There's not enough. They're not all going to get enough minutes. So like Jordan Nwora,
like they could have tried to trade Bruce Brown, for example.
Right, and they're not going to just like sit Bruce Brown down for the season. I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. You would have a very unhappy Bruce Brown on your hands, and you would be maybe to whatever extent he still has value, you'd be diminishing that for next year. But like R.J. Barrett, Gary Trent Jr., Grady Dick, Ochai Agbaji, Scotty Barnes, Jordan Nwora. Those guys are all 25 and under, and there's probably like 4 rotation spots there. Maybe you can expand it to 6 if you're going to play with like some non-point guard minutes and some Scotty at center minutes still.
I would love to see that.
And then you've all like McDaniels is under contract for next year, and I mean he just turned 26. He should be at the bottom of those on merit.
Sneak him into that Brooklyn trade.
Yeah, and then Bruce Brown is still around. So that's 8 guys for like at most like 6, maybe 7 rotation spots, and that's if you're spreading the minutes around. So there are going to be odd guys out every night, and I think of those 8, we can safely put McDaniels at the bottom, but like Nwora might be next at the bottom versus the other 6 guys, given where the Raptors are and what they have invested in these other pieces. Dude, like would you put Nwora above Agbaji, Dick, Trent, Barrett, Barnes minutes?
No, but I think that if you had moved Bruce Brown, which obviously
I didn't mention him in there specifically because because the
other guys you can actually finesse and at least give him a chance. That's the thing. Whatever. I guess. Yeah. Look, for me personally, I'm hoping for whatever we get from the Pascal trade to be maximized. So a maximized version would be you give Nwora a shot and he turns into something. You may be able to re-sign him. All of a sudden, that looks like you got a piece out of that. Right, you got the picks. One of those picks became Agbaji. Hopefully, you give Agbaji a shot. Then hopefully, it becomes anything out of that. So then the trade looks better and better. You know what I mean? But otherwise, like the Bruce part was a big part of it. Was that was supposed to be a big part of that. But we'll see. I guess if the Raptors flip him at the draft. But in the meantime, we have Bobby Webster going to the podium, and let's just take you there.
I saw the patties out there. I haven't seen I've never seen the patties out there before. It looks like a craft beer. Yep.
So, I guess about when you decided that you were going to be active, going back to early December, did you are you sort of where you thought you would be based on the moves in total that we did?
It's a good question. I think I'd characterize, this trade deadline. We did our heavy lifting about a month ago, and so I feel like this trade deadline we cleaned up a lot of things, and we, addressed some of the things we talked about after the OG and Pascal trades. we were able to turn one of the picks into a good young player in Ochai, and it's kind of a steady in presence in Kelly. Financially, we were able to, gain some more flexibility this summer with the Dennis trade. But yeah, I think the heavy lifting was done this, December, January, and this kind of like deadline continued on kind of that path. If that makes sense.
There wasn't great speculation about Bruce's future. Was there as much interest as we were led to believe, and why were you unable to come up with anything like?
Yeah, I think it's fair. Had we gotten the offers we wanted for Bruce, if kind of hit our threshold, we would have done something. At the same time, I think Bruce is 27. He has a really interesting contract. He provides a professionalism and toughness I think we're all seeing on the court, so we value that. And there's options with Bruce this summer. I also think if you look around the league today, there weren't a ton of major moves. And so I think that, maybe some larger macro elements in the NBA are contributing to, teams going forward and making big deals. But no, we're happy with Bruce. We're happy to continue on with him.
You mentioned getting the heavy lifting done early. What, I guess, was the thinking behind making those moves as early as you guys did, as opposed to taking it up closer to the deadline for Pascal and OG? And in the end, was it beneficial, I guess, to have this time the last few weeks to gauge the market on some of the other guys after doing the heavy lifting early?
Yeah, so a couple parts there. I think, to be honest, the start of the season didn't kind of, get off how we wanted to. And so I think we were, in some ways forced to address, those two situations. I also think the value for those players, a lot of the conversations we had around those two players were the teams wanted to acquire them as early as possible, so they had a longer, runway for the rest of the season. So I think a couple of factors contributed to those deals happening early. I think it lessened the load, right, of, imagine trying to do all those deals this week. That wasn't necessarily the intention of it, but it did give us a stretch. We've had some injuries and whatnot, but at least we've had a little bit of time, or more time than normal. Had we done those deals at the trade deadline, we'd be looking at, 25 to 30 games with that group, whereas now we're going to have, hopefully 45 to 50 looking at that young group. So doing it early, I think, was advantageous for us, was advantageous for the teams that have acquired them, and allows us to approach this deadline understanding who the core of this team is.
This is the third straight year you acquired a pending free agent, and correct me if I'm wrong, with, somewhat of an intention of keeping him around for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously that comes with bird rights. It's not something you see a ton around the league, so why do you guys like this?
Well, I think, you could probably even date back to the Surge trade, right? I mean, I think it allows you to, bring that person in-house, get a feel for them, understand how they fit with your culture, how they fit basketball-wise, and then make that decision in the summer from a bit more of an informed point of view. So I think that's just generally the thinking behind it. I guess specifically you're asking with respect to Kelly. Yeah, so I think Kelly, listen, everyone in here has followed him for a long time. We've been big fans of Kelly. I think the way we view him specifically is, he's kind of like a steady hand, and I think we've seen it with the bench units, especially with the bigs. He's going to provide a skill set, a veteran presence, a voice that, we think that unit could, use some help with. And so we're excited to have Kelly. The conversations have been great. I think he really wants to be here. He's excited for this opportunity. I think from a contract perspective, he is extension eligible right now, so it's a little different than some of the other players. So you can have those conversations and, have an understanding of what he's looking for.
How do you think the new CBA played a part? How did you feel about playing a part of this trade deadline?
It's probably a bit too much CBA minutia, but I think you had a number of large factors kind of contributing to a restricted market. So you had a lot of the contending teams just didn't have a ton of assets. So the teams that you would normally would be buyers just were kind of capped out or, didn't have the draft picks. I think everyone is a little unsure about the pending financial penalties under the new system. And so I think that contributed to, the sellers maybe being less inclined to take on money that they otherwise would have been, and then the typical buyers just not kind of having the ammo to come out and get guys.
You mentioned that now you guys have a pretty good idea of the core that you're building around. Is Gary part of that group? I mean, he's in that same age bracket or similar age bracket with those guys, but of course, he's going to be a free agent. Where do you kind of see him in his future with this team?
Yeah, so I think on the surface, Gary's 25 years old and a 40% three-point shooter, right? So you'd start there. I think he probably would even admit he didn't get off to as good of a start as he would have wanted to, but he's kind of settled in now and we're seeing it. So I think it's a little TBD on Gary, but I think we're watching him grow with this group. We're watching him, pick and choose his spots offensively. I think you're seeing him be a bit more aggressive defensively, which we've seen over the years. So I think it's a great stretch for him, and it's a great stretch for us to evaluate him.
The decision to waive Spencer for whatever reason, but you freed up roster spots. You expect to fill them?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, part of the Spencer decision making was just age. We want to play young guys. We want to take looks at, we've seen some Scotty at point guard. We'll, hopefully see more there. But it also does free up 2 roster spots for us to bring in some guys, take shots on, some free agents, scour the G League, overseas. So we'll definitely use those 2 roster spots.
You mentioned wanting to go after young players just there. One of the guys you added was 32-year-old Kelly. And you had there are other older players on this team. Why didn't you guys go all young, for example?
I think we were trying to find the right mix. We've and even in personal conversations with a lot of teams in our similar position, the young guys need leadership, right? And I think we lost a bit of that in veteran presence when we made our earlier deals. And so you're trying to find that right chemistry of who can kind of guide these players. It's tough for us to lose Thad. I think everybody's seen how important he was, and he had to be included in that deal. So are we simultaneously bringing in young players to develop and grow, but also creating an environment around them where they're learning professional habits, they're being held accountable, they're understanding how to play basketball at the NBA level, they're learning how to win. So that's the mix that we're always trying to shoot for.
You've brought in 2 Canadians, in RJ and Kelly, in these deals. Is their nationality bringing 2 hometown guys play a role, or is it just strictly basketball decisions?
Yeah, I mean, it starts with the basketball piece. I think, we're biased and we've watched them grow up more, so maybe we're more familiar with their game, right? I always tell people, if there's ever a young Canadian kid up, like, it's our job to know them in and out and make sure that, we have a good feel on them. And so from both of those point of views, we love them as players first. And it's great that they are Canadian, they want to be here. And so I think that'd be the other piece, which is having players that want to play here, goes a long way on many levels.
Ochai was obviously highly touted coming off that Final Four and part of the Donovan Mitchell trade as well. I mean, what do you guys see in him that made him sort of the guy to pursue?
Yeah, hardworking, high character, 2-way player, kind of fits the bill of guys we've pursued over the years. 4-year player at Kansas, so you got to watch his development. I think he ended his run as maybe most outstanding player of the tournament that year. Has started at times in Utah, so we feel like we're getting a young player with a lot of upside, hard worker, high character, and so we'll bet on those.
The team that Darko got, obviously, when he was hired, is quite different than the team he has now. How do you feel he's reacted to sort of all the changes over the past few months and sort of going forward?
Darko's great, and I think part of the interview process, you go through all those scenarios, right? We know the team that we were going to put forth, but we also knew the potential changes that could happen. So that we're very upfront, we're communicative. He's been part of a lot of different NBA franchises, so I don't think this feels entirely new to him. But a lot of it's just day-to-day or even hourly conversations about the direction of the team, and so it's been something we've been discussing internally with him for a while now, and especially after the 2 major moves before, he kind of saw this was the direction that everything was going.
You mentioned a couple of minutes ago about veterans teaching them how to be pros and building culture of winning. You haven't had a lot of winning. You're 13. How does this sort of foster that part of it?
Which would
These
say,
traits, like, how does it make your team win more?
right? I think Ochai, he will develop in a competitive environment. I think he'll develop with guys his age group. So I think that is, one of our big focuses is getting guys in that sort of 22, 28 kind of age group. I think Kelly helps solidify that as a presence off the bench. We've seen that, especially in the front court off the bench, that we've had some, trouble rebounding or whatever you may say. So yeah, I think it solidifies in the sense that we're going to keep competing. And, there'll be a structure in place that, will allow us to be competitive in all the games.
sort of on that note, Bobby, you get a player in Scotty who's an all-star now and clearly is on the rise, and so, how much focus is on making sure he's surrounded with players that he can go and compete with versus, how did you get a player like Scotty, right? Like the top tier draft pick. So how do you kind of balance building a team that remains sort of competitive around it, but still, you need star power in this league?
Yeah, I think that's just the process that we're all probably, going through now. And so how long do you give it? We made some moves now, the summer, this is probably a multi-year process. And so I think from the point of view of building around Scotty, you want young players in his age group that I think culturally, socially, energy-wise, I think you want to put skill sets around him. And so I think we'll be interested to see a Kelly skill set. I don't know if he's had a player like Kelly to play with. And then you want guys who just want to be here, want to run. I think Ochai's energy will invigorate Scotty. So you're trying to hit on all those points, sort of age, culture, social, skill set, and that's what we'll continue to do.
And I guess with the pick that's over San Antonio, is there any emphasis on, we're pretty close to maybe keeping it this year, or I guess the word, how important is for you to get a top 6 pick either this year or next year?
I think we're going to prioritize seeing this group play. If it ends up that we're in the top 6, sure, if we're out of the top 6, but I don't think that, especially the way that the new NBA rules are, to try and game that doesn't make a ton of sense, right? At the end of the day, it's going to be the lottery balls. So I don't think there's a ton of let's do this or that, but I think the big priority for us is playing that young group together, getting Grady in there with that group, seeing how they fit together, because that will give us a lot more information about how to build the team, what moves to make this summer, as opposed to what's going to happen over the next, 20, 25 games.
You guys Masai talks about rebuilding as a champion years last time. You don't see a ton of teams in that sort of position giving up a first round pick. You guys obviously had a couple, but why did you feel comfortable giving up an asset like that, a future asset in the trade today?
I think we said, we had 3, maybe even 4 first round picks if you include the Detroit pick. And so to a lot of the sort of the things we've been talking about, it's hard to bring in that many kids into an environment, grow them, in the right way. I think you're seeing it with Grady, which is there's a ton of resources, staff, programs in place, but there's a lot that you need to do to raise them. And so I think, the thought of 3 or 4 of them felt like, hey, if we can cash in one now for someone like Ochai, who's still young, but early in his career, then you kind of solidified one of those. And so I don't think we view it as using a pick that we otherwise would have wanted in the draft. We kind of use it to get the type of player we would want to have gotten in the draft.
Just following up on that, is that it's safe to say that maybe we're opting for other picks in this draft, and it's the same reason you don't want to have too many of that?
I think the value with the picks, so if we had the Indy pick, we potentially have our own, but that's going to San Antonio, the 31. Yeah, so there's different tiers, right? And so you could, come up with all the scenarios. You use 2 picks on this player, to use 1 pick on this player, to use all 3 picks on somebody. And so, I guess that's the game we're playing. And so we decided ultimately that the 1 pick for Ochai and Kelly made sense.
Where does Chris Boucher fit when he's kind of looks like he's slipped out of the rotation and, been here for a while, he's got that extra year on his deal. Was there much interest or movement around him? How do you project the next kind of couple of months on him?
I think Chris is the longest standing Raptor now. So, we have good relationship with Chris. We have good communication. I think he's obviously going through a tough time, but he's been professional. He's been good energy. We talk to him often. So, I think we traded 8 players so far. And so, sounds like some people would rather trade 15, but, we got a lot of work done. And so there's more moves to be done. But with Chris, I'm sure he'll bounce back like he always does. He didn't get to this place in the NBA if he wasn't resilient. And it seems like every time he's out, he's back in. But we're not too concerned with Chris.
With the Dennis trade, you guys created some flexibility. It seems like this summer. This is an organization that brings in top tier free agents very often. What do you see as the value of that flexibility or that money?
It's not necessarily to use cap space. I think you can. I think the Bruce contract's another one where you can kind of open up a ton if you want. So more was just the optionality of going into this summer with reduced committeds, and so you just have more options available to you. So I don't think there was anything specifically in mind, like, hey, we're doing this or we're doing that, as opposed to let's see what our books look like with 13 million or so off the books.
So I said last summer, obviously Jim Howie didn't really enjoy watching the team play a year ago. What's it been like to watch the team play this year? Obviously, it hasn't been a winning season. Just from a front office standpoint, has the attitude or has that shifted at all?
I think where we are now, it's young, exciting. I think we're all watching new players, so there's probably just different parts of your brain going off as you watch quickly come off a pick and roll, or you watch RJ slash through the lane, or you watch Scotty interact with them, and so watching Jordan Nwora come and have those games. So I think it's more fun. There's a different energy around the team, so I think we're enjoying this part of the process with a younger team as they grow and develop.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Nice.
The real question,
What's up?
if you have any conversations today that can be continued in the summer.
There's always ones, right?
No,
I don't know. There wasn't that much movement today, was there? Who was the best player? Who was the best player dealt? Buddy, Boyan. Oh.
All right, that was Raptors general manager Bobby Webster at the podium. We'll never know what the side saddle was. That's why me and Blake typically are down there for press conferences, so we can get all the little off-the-record scoops. That's what per sources means.
I haven't been at one of these in forever, man. I've been live on air for the last 40 times Bobby or Messiah spoke.
Oh, well, you could always text them. But
we'll text about the CBA minutia stuff, but that's about it. Bobby dropping the optionality of going into this summer with reduced committeds.
Goodness, Bobby. Why do you talk like that sometimes? No, I actually want my GM to talk like that. Absolutely. Okay, so did you get some more clarity on the Raptors' direction based off what Bobby was talking about there?
Not clarity because they told us what to do, but clarity in terms of the kind of stuff we've been kicking around feels fairly accurate. Like, they are valuing flexibility here. I joked about the optionality of reduced committeds, but he was non-committal on using the cap space toward players. He was non-committal on are these guys all sticking around? Does this mean Bruce is a part of the core? They have once again prioritized the flexibility, and that is I can feel an impatience from obviously being on Twitter and having people give us feedback on the show throughout the day. There's an impatience there, and again, a diminished an expiry date that diminishes the value of that flexibility as you move further on. But that's what we're talking about. He gave the impression it's a multi-year trek to find the right pieces that fit around Scotty. It's they're not necessarily going to use all this cap flexibility to sign guys. Maybe it's about trades. Maybe it's about being predatory and taking on, contracts. And he only kind of hinted at CBA minutia, but I'd reading between the lines, that's the impression I kind of got. A lot of teams are going to be tight for flexibility. And if you have that flexibility, you can be predatory with that and pick up assets.
It's a wild way of saying that.
Yeah. And I think that, there's nothing, we didn't really learn anything. It's really the question I'm left with is or not even the question, but the clear path here. And actually, the one thing that fans probably most wanted to hear clarity on is they're not benching guys down the stretch. He said the priority is now to see this group play together as much as possible, which makes sense when your whole, other than Kelly Olynyk, your entire rotation is 27 and under. Bruce Brown's the next oldest guy at 27. But there was a very clear acknowledgement that you don't control the fate of your pick even. So these guys
you don't entirely control the fate of your pick, but again, they're not taking like that. Okay, here's the thing:
the furthest, right now, they're at they'd have a 45% chance of keeping the pick. They can only get that as high as 63%.
Exactly. Takeaways from this: the Bruce Brown threshold for trade wasn't hit, which I guess is supposedly obvious. But I assume that threshold was a first-round pick. I'm sure we'll hear more reports of that coming out. He also did continue to mention he's got a really interesting contract. So I looked into it. The club option for the Raptors to pick up his $23 million for
29th
is 29th. The draft is June 27th.
Yeah.
So if a team wanted to open up more space around the draft, which would be the next cycle of moves, it's supposed you could still move Bruce Brown then, and then of course teams can sort of essentially turn down the option, et cetera, et cetera. And on Kelly Olynyk, he called him a steady hand for the second unit. So it does not seem like Kelly is going to be for the starting group. I'm sure maybe some games he might start, on an interim basis. He also did mention that he is extension eligible, which again suggests that I'm not worried that Kelly's going to go anywhere, but he is an unrestricted free agent.
And
Most
one
likely
small
will
note
gonna
on
hold
that
him.
for the cap flexibility, and sorry to interrupt you there.
So-
I thought you were done your thought. With respect to the cap flexibility, if you get an extension done and it's lower than his current deal, then you don't have to worry. Kelly has a big cap hold right now, which would mean that, if you're on the fence about it, you gotta make that decision quick on Kelly.
Right.
But if you sign him an extension, then there's the cost certainty and his cap
Sure.
hold's not there. It's a much more let's say it's a 2-year 20 that we kicked around earlier. Maybe that's on the high end, but whatever. Then that's on the books instead of the cap hold. There's a little bit of flexibility of that. The Gary extension possibility came up as well, but pretty non-committal there.
Yeah, he did say Gary's 25 and a 40% shooter, which is really matter of fact. That's always the thing I appreciate with Bobby. And then the last one, he just did notice that, look, a lot of buyers didn't have a lot of assets or they were capped out, and everybody's very unsure about the new CBA in terms of how that's going to punish everybody. So I think that kind of explains, not about the Raptors specifically, but in general, the lack of activity at the trade deadline. But yeah, that was the 2024 trade deadline. Do you have a fun moment did you have a favorite moment before we wrap here?
Man, you're all about the favorite moments today, eh?
Look, listen, it's a lot of exits. I think I want to just process the feelings of we had Dennis on the show every week.
Yeah.
Now he's gone.
I think my favorite part of today was how many Spencer Dinwiddie Bitcoin jokes you got in his Raptors era.
Damn.
He was a Raptor for 27 minutes. You got like 5 crypto jokes in.
If people didn't know what I was talking about, please look it up. Didn't he want his contract tied to
We don't need to get all into that.
coin?
Yeah.
Anyway, well, it's too bad. We'll see where he lands. But the Raptors, as is right now, we have a roster. As Bobby said, we did move 8 players. Sounds like some people would have wanted to trade 15. Haha. I mean, I don't know if people wanted to see 15 players traded, but I guess the point is they did change over literally half the roster. So now that we have the deadline in the rear view, what we're going to do is actually get to focus on games again. And look, wins and losses not as important to me. How they play together is the most important thing. And we do have a lot of new players to look at and evaluate. So as Bobby said, I also do get an excitement when I see quickly pull up off the pick and roll. I also do get excitement when I see RJ slash downhill. I also do get excitement to see Scotty interact with those two guys. So that's the mission statement for the rest of the season. How do the young guys play together? And the pick will land where the pick will land. But that does it for us today. Been your host, Willow. You've been listening to The Raptors Show on the Sportsnet Radio Network, brought to you by Campbell's new Chunky Spicy Soup. It's time to get fired up. Make sure you find The Raptors Show wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe, and please rate and review the show. Thanks once again to producers Mark Boffel, I'm Amon. Huge day for YouTube. Appreciate both your help. For producer Derek Brandale, Jennifer Molnick, David Sis, Jared Manatite helping behind the scenes. Thanks to our guest, Michael Grange. Goodbye to our guest, Dennis Schroeder. And we'll be back to talk Raptors basketball tomorrow.